Okay, welcome everyone. We are going to begin a brand new Bible study in the book of Romans. And so welcome everyone to this study. Before we begin this journey through this wonderful book of Romans, we will take a little, have a little preview onto what, about a little bit about the author of this book, Apostle Paul. Right? There is little doubt whether Apostle Paul wrote this because he himself introduces himself. So there is no real question on that. For example, like Hebrews, right? The author is unknown, although we have some indications that it might be Paul, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But let me give a little bit of introduction, right? Let me share my screen. Just let me know when you can see my screen, please.
Yes.
Okay. It's better. Sorry. Okay, so the book of Romans. Okay, so the author is Apostle Paul. He himself says, I am the author of this book. So who was this Apostle Paul? Right. So let's take a look at a man called Saul. Right. When Jesus was there on this earth, Saul also was living around the same time as Jesus. We don't have any indication that Saul ever met Jesus, but Saul was a Jew by descent, meaning his fathers, all of them were Jews, right? But he was also a Roman citizen by birth, right? So his father, his parents, long ago, they were brought by Romans as slaves to a city called Tarsus, which was under the province of Sicilia. If you see the Roman map, you will get that. And there Saul was born, but by then Saul was born, that entire province became a free city, which means that anybody who is born a free citizen, right? Which means anyone who's born in that place becomes automatically a Roman citizen, right? And there were two ways to get citizenship. Either you are born in a free city like that, or you have to buy citizenship. In the book of Acts, you see, I think there was instance of one or two people who had to buy Roman citizenship. You have to pay money for citizenship. But Saul never indicates that he went that route. He got Roman citizenship because he was born there. So that's why he says, I'm a Jew to the Jew, I'm a Roman to the Roman. So he was very, very comfortable talking to the Romans also. And because he was a Roman, he was able to talk to Roman officials. If you see in the book of Acts, he was able to get a hearing from the king, King Agrippa. He was able to bypass certain procedures because he had Roman citizenship, right? And he knew the Gentiles very well because of his acquaintance, right, as a Roman. But he studied in Jewish schools and he became a very, very good scholar, right? But this man, Saul, was very zealous, meaning he had a very strong purpose to fulfill the aspirations of the Jews and what was written in the Torah in the Old Testament, right? And so he, with that particular zeal in mind, he did not like the Christians after Jesus died, right? And he did not, because he knew that the Jewish leadership also did not like Jesus at all, right? And so they put him to death. But Saul does not really come into picture at the death of Jesus Christ, but Saul later becomes a member of the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is the member of 70 members. They were the, like the parliament, right? The lawmaking body for the Jews. Although they were under the Romans, but Jewish laws, Jewish religion practices, they were the highest governing body for that. So he was a member of that. To become a member of that, you have to be really, really learned and highly influential. People like Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, they became members of the Sanhedrin. So in that level, Saul was there. He was called Saul. But later on, after Jesus died in 31 AD, all the Christians, scattered here and there, especially after the stoning of Stephen, 34 AD. That is when the first time we hear about Saul. The people who went to stone Stephen, because Stephen went to the Sanhedrin to give a speech, right, to the Sanhedrin, and he told them, you people are like vipers, and you don't listen. They were so angry that they said, you go and stone him to death. And while people wanted to go stone him to death, they took out their jackets, their cloaks, and then placed them at the feet of Saul. And Saul approved of the stoning of Stephen. And from that point of time, Saul was persecuting the Christians. And after persecuting the Christians so much, he heard that not only in Jerusalem, he used to persecute and imprison people in Jerusalem, but he said in Damascus, in Syria also, there are so many Christians. I'm going to go there also and then imprison people and bring them back to Jerusalem. But while he was going to Damascus, he encountered Jesus. And then Jesus stopped him on the way and then spoke to him, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And then Saul came to know that, what he was doing till now was wrong. Not that he was a bad man, right? But he was not on the right track. And why did, it's very interesting. God could have ended by killing Saul, right? At that moment, send something and then strike him and then kill him, and there would be no problem for the Christians. No, God knew that he would be a great champion for God, for the Christians. It's just that his understanding was not correct. And somewhere in his mind, Saul had the question, am I doing the right thing? But all of that he covered with his tradition. And he covered it all with the Jewish, practices and everything. And he thought maybe the Jewish leaders are right. But when God spoke to him directly, immediately he came to know that what I had in mind was wrong and what they are doing is correct. And so he responds, who are you, Lord? And then he listens to God. And then God converts him, makes him blind, right, for 3 days. And then he goes to Damascus. A prophet comes, a servant of God comes and then touches his eyes. And then he could see after that. But everybody was so afraid because they came to know that this man came to Damascus to persecute us. And so they didn't want to go to him. But later on, as they started knowing about him, that he, changed, slowly they got acquainted. But who was angry with Saul? The Jews who sent him, the Jewish leaders. They wanted to kill him now, right? And from that point, his journey starts. And, in the book of Galatians, he says, when it pleased God who separated me from my mother's womb and called me through grace to reveal his son in me, that I might preach him among the Gentiles. There were a lot of people to preach to the Jews, but he said, God called me to preach to the Gentiles. But I did not immediately confer with flesh and blood, which means I did not immediately mingle with people, right? Because I don't even know whom to trust, right? Whether they really believe that I am transformed and changed. So I did not immediately mingle with people, or I did not even go to Jerusalem immediately, right? One would think that once he got that realization, he would go back to Jerusalem. That is where Peter and all the other disciples were there. No, I didn't go there. But from Damascus, where did he go? He went to Arabia, right? And then again, he returned to Damascus. From Damascus, he went to Arabia. What did he do there? Here it says here, then after 3 years, I went to Jerusalem to see Peter and remained with him 15 days. How long was he there in Arabia? 3 years. 3 years he was there in Arabia. And people are wondering, what did he do in Arabia for 3 years? And Paul himself explains, what did I do in Arabia for 3 years? You see here, but I make known to you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached to me is not according to man. What do you mean the gospel preached to me is not according to man? See, he is telling that the disciples, the 12 disciples that were there, of course, Judas died by then, but all the disciples of Jesus got their message from whom? Directly from Jesus. They learned directly from Jesus. But some people, others, learned from the disciples. They didn't learn from Jesus directly. They learned it indirectly from Peter, from James, from John, from Philip, from Nathaniel. Others they heard. So he is telling the gospel that was preached to me, it should have been from Peter or John or James, from the disciples. If you didn't hear it from Jesus, then where did you hear it from? But he's saying it's not according to any man. For I neither received it from man, nor was I taught. I was not taught by these people, but where did it come from? It came through the revelation of Jesus Christ. He's telling that while I was in Arabia, do you know who taught me? Jesus Christ himself taught me. He had personal connection, personal communion with Jesus every day. How long was Jesus with the disciples? 3.5 years, his ministry. How long was Jesus with Paul? 3 years. So what he is trying to tell all the church members, that he went to Galatia, Colossians, Thessalonians, I am on par with the disciples. If disciples spent 3 years with Jesus personally, I also spent 3 years with Jesus personally. I did not get this information from the disciples. In Arabia, Jesus taught me personally. What they know, I also know. From whom they got, I also got. Same time, same person. I got it from Jesus directly. That is what he told the Galatians. And that's what he's trying to tell, right? And so Paul, though he was based in Tarsus, he was often going to Jerusalem because, now he's involved in the gospel work, right? And so he, one of the people who came, during that time, a lot of people, early Christians, would sell all that they had and they would give it to the ministry, right? Everything they would have, and they would give to sell their land and houses and everything. We know that story, right? Ananias and Sapphira, what happened? We all know it. They said that, that's all the money they got, but anyway, they died because they lied. One of the persons who did that was Barnabas, right? Barnabas also was a very, very devoted Christian, early Christian. He was from a place called Cyprus, right? Barnabas, liked Paul very much. And Barnabas wanted to go for some missionary work. So he said, Paul, you come with me. Me and you will partner and we'll go. Right? So he brought Paul, he introduced Paul to everybody, to the disciples and everything. And Paul and Barnabas, when they were ministering in different places, so much conversion was taking place, especially in one place called Antioch. Right? That is where first the word Christians was used, Antioch. Right? The word Christians was first used there in Antioch. It was because of the work of Barnabas and Paul in Antioch. Right? That was their base. And all the disciples also used to come to Antioch to see how come the work is flourishing so much. But after that, they said, you know what, we did enough in Antioch. Let's go. We have to go to Asia. We have to go to Europe. So Paul takes a missionary journey. This was his first missionary journey. Right? You can see here, from Antioch, they go to Cyprus. First, they went to Cyprus because Barnabas knows Cyprus very well. Barnabas was from Cyprus. So he said, let's go to Cyprus. And they went here, and then they went up. Actually, 3 people go. There's another person called John Mark, right? The one who wrote the Gospel of Mark. 3 of them go from here to here. But did they have a good time, or people were opposing them? They did not have a good time. Anywhere they went, people absolutely were putting all kinds of opposition upon them. They didn't want their work to go. And because of all that obstruction, they came here and one person returned back, John Mark. Right? John Mark said, I cannot take this anymore. And so he went back. And for some time, Paul did not like John Mark because of that. Right? And because of John Mark, there was an argument between Paul and Barnabas also. Right? To the point where Paul said, if John Mark is going, if you want to take him, I'm not going. And so Paul took Silas and went. Anyway, that's a different story. So this was the first missionary journey, right? They went here. They didn't go very far, right? There was another Antioch in Asia. So you can see all this area, Galatia, all, Turkey, that region. And then they came back. Yeah. And then they went on a second missionary journey. This was long. Same place. They started from Antioch. They went here. Now they went into Europe. You see here, they went to Neapolis, Philippi, the Philippian church, Thessalonica. This is in Greece. Right? And then they went to Athens, the capital of Greece. They went to Corinth. And then they went to a church in Ephesus. And then they came back to Jerusalem. They didn't go to Antioch. They came back to Jerusalem here. Right? So that was the second missionary journey. He went on 3 missionary journeys. This is the third one. Here also, he started here. They went again, very similar to the second missionary journey. Pretty much the same places they covered. And then he went back like this, just came back on a slightly different road, came back to Tyre, right, on the ship. And then after the third missionary journey, Paul took a journey to Rome, right? Here also, Paul went in the front of King Agrippa, and then he was giving him the whole story of his conversion and how many people who are king didn't like it, that all the Jews are getting converted like this, and he saw that as a threat. So he ordered the arrest of Paul, where in Caesarea, right? He said, you have to be arrested. So a Roman general took Paul to Sidon, put him on a ship, and then he and some other prisoners, he took all of them and then took them like this. And right, in the book of Acts, I think 27, you will see his journey to Rome. That also was not easy. Their ship was, while they were going, they faced storms. In Malta, their ship was wrecked completely. They had to come out of the ship, and in Malta, he started preaching there, right? And then couple of times they wanted to kill all the prisoners, otherwise they thought they'll escape because their ship was wrecked. Anyway, finally they made it to Rome, and there he was imprisoned. For 2 years, Paul was imprisoned. He was chained.
When that is wreck, he didn't stay.
He stayed there for some time, for a few months, but after that they found another ship and then they sailed to Rome. Because ultimately that Roman general had to take him to Rome.
Oh, the general was
he was still, yeah, he was always there in that ship. Right? So anyway, they took him to Rome, and then they imprisoned him in a very small room, but always there was a guard, and he was chained all the time. Right? And then he only was able to go inside that room. Right? But from there, he wrote some letters to some churches. Right? And then he was freed for some time. He really wanted to go to Spain. Right? And in the book of Romans, actually, he tells them, I want to go to Spain. On the way, I want to meet you. Right? So arrange for my finances and all of that, he says. So he may have gone to Spain for a short time, but again, he was arrested and brought back to Rome, after which he was beheaded. Right? But that was his final journey to Rome. But that's the story of Paul in a nutshell. This is roughly, I just put the chronology of Paul's writings. When did he write? Which book? Right? In his first missionary journey, it took place 45 to 47. Remember, the 34 AD, Stephen was stoned to death. Right? And from 34 AD to 45, they were laboring within Israel only. Right? Jerusalem and nearby places, Antioch, Tarsus, in those places they used to go. Then he took his first missionary journey in 45. During that journey, of course, he didn't write any because he was getting introduced to people. Second missionary journey, he wrote first the book of First Thessalonians, but he wrote it while being in Corinth, right? So, for example, in the second missionary journey, right? This is the second, this is the third, sorry. Second missionary journey. He went to Thessalonica and then Berea, and then he came to Corinth. And while he was here, he wrote a letter to Thessalonians, right? Because he spent some time there, a few months in Thessalonica. So, he didn't want them to forget certain things. And so he wrote a letter to them, so that way. And then Second Thessalonians also he wrote 2 letters from Corinth. In the third missionary journey, then he wrote to the First Corinthians, Second Corinthians, he wrote one from Ephesus, one from Macedonia in 57, 58 AD. You see here the 6th letter, he wrote about 14 letters, Paul. All are in the New Testament. 13 are mentioned here, right? Because Hebrews is, a debate as to who wrote it. But we'll get to Hebrews. Lower this a little bit. Or maybe put it here, yeah. So you see the 6th letter that he wrote is Romans. Sometime he wrote it in 58 AD and he wrote it from Corinth while he was on his 3rd missionary journey. Yeah. And then after that, his first imprisonment took place. He was imprisoned and took for 2 years, right? So that happened in 61 AD. From Rome, from the prison room, from that small house, he wrote to Philemon, he wrote to the church at Colossae, he wrote to the church at Ephesus, he wrote to the church at Philippi. While he was imprisoned, he wrote all these letters, right? And then he was freed for some time, right? During that time, he wrote so during that free time, he may have gone back to Macedonia, to Greece. He may have gone to Spain, right? But it is widely believed he came back for a little while. And during that time, he wrote First Timothy, right? The book of Acts actually doesn't, book of Acts ends very abruptly. He says, I'm imprisoned, right? And that's all it says. And if you see Acts 28, I think that's the last chapter. Very, very suddenly it ends. We don't even know what happened to Paul afterwards. But through the letters that Paul wrote, we kind of get an idea. Writes to First Timothy, he says, go and bring my coat. Go and say hello to this person. I met this person. I met that person, which means that he was free for some time. So by that we can get it. And when he wrote his letter to Titus as well, there are indications that he was a free man, right? But by then he wrote Second Timothy. First Timothy and Second Timothy are very different. Second Timothy, he was in great distress. And if you read Second Timothy, that he was getting ready for his death, right? He was saying, I know what is going to happen to me. My departure is at hand. That's what he says. I am being poured out like an offering here. So, a drink offering. So, he knew that the Romans are not going to give him any more hearings in the court, right? Though he was a Roman citizen, he was hoping, but he knew that that's not going to happen. And so he said, I'm done. Right? So that was in his second imprisonment, and he was beheaded after that. The other book, Hebrews, that is not given here, because officially he did not introduce himself as Paul. A lot of people don't know exactly, right? But again, we have to understand by reading the book of Hebrews, right? The language that is used, the kind of in-depth knowledge that is needed to understand the book of Hebrews, very similar to the language that he used in Romans or in Corinthians or other places, poetic language. And also towards the end of Hebrews, I think last second verse, he says, please greet our brother Timothy. And so only Paul regarded Timothy, my brother, my son, Timothy. He really loved Timothy so much, right? And so he wrote, please greet our brother Timothy. And so there are indications, in all likelihood, it was Paul that wrote the book of Hebrews as well. Yeah. So that's just an introduction. So now we get to the theme of the book of Romans. The theme is very simple. What is the universal sinfulness of man? What is the universal grace of God? How are we restored? We are not only pardoned, but we are also restored. Restored to perfection, restored to holiness. What is that way? And he argues in the book of Romans that way is what? It's only faith in Jesus Christ. We are saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. That is a excerpt from the book of Romans. It is the Son of God who died, rose again, and he still lives to reconcile us and to restore us, our relationship with him. That is the theme of the book of Romans. Right? So we are going to begin this book of Romans shortly. And I pray that God will bless us as we journey in this book.